Hello and welcome to Sectors Up Close. I'm Angeline Ong. Our focus today is on the US healthcare sector, and my guest is Bryan Koslow, principal of independent financial planning firm Clarus Group. Now, healthcare is traditionally a defensive sector, with investors banking on the fact that an aging population in the US and elsewhere will underpin growing demand for healthcare, slowly but surely lifting sales for drug makers, medical equipment makers, and healthcare providers too. But the pandemic has at least temporarily disrupted this sector. Huge resources poured into vaccine development, boosting the profiles of drug makers, while lockdowns put the brakes on elective and other procedures, creating a backlog that now needs clearing. The S&P 500 Healthcare Index has seen steady gains this year. It's up around 19%, so just behind the wider S&P 500 index. Drug makers make up a larger portion of this $5 trillion sector. United Health is the only healthcare provider in the top 10. The rest are medical equipment makers. So how should an investor navigate this space? Let's ask Bryan Koslow of Clarus Group. Hey Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. Now, much of the focus recently, as I mentioned earlier, been on vaccines. What other reasons make this sector compelling to investors compared to, say, tech?
Thanks for having me. So healthcare, we think, has a number of themes around it that are very bullish. As you mentioned, we are actually looking at healthcare as a reopening play. There is a lot of pent-up demand for procedures and preventive maintenance that just has not happened while people were home quarantining or on lockdown. So we think there's going to be a bit of a resurgence in healthcare spending, number one. Number two, we think a lot of the regulatory risk that was around previously with the prior administration has dissipated, and regulatory focus has shifted more to big tech and away from healthcare. So there was pressure on drug pricing. There was concern about the Affordable Care Act possibly coming under pressure. And so some of that has gone away. And so we think the regulatory environment is much more favorable. And then the third thing, as you mentioned in your opening, is the demographics in this country are very favorable. We are an aging population. Over the next 30 or 40 years, the 65 and older population is going to grow by close to 70%. And so we know that older adults tend to spend nearly double what younger adults spend on healthcare. And so that's very bullish from an earnings perspective.
So given all this, do the current earnings for these companies justify their price gains, or are they just being lifted overall by the easy money looking for a home?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the healthcare sector is about in line with the S&P year to date, but over 12 months, it's actually trailing the S&P 500. So we think there's an opportunity for a rotation out of some of the even higher valued sectors like technology or industrials, and for some of that money to flow into healthcare. So we do think the valuations are justified, particularly in this low interest rate environment.
Speaking of rotation, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has revealed it's selling positions in several large drug makers like AbbVie, Merck, and biopharmas. What's your view on these companies?
So healthcare is a pretty diverse sector. You have big pharma, you've got biotech, which is also kind of segmented between very large biotech and then hundreds of small biotechs. We've got medical device, we have hospital chains, we have managed care. So we like certain parts of the healthcare sector, and we're staying away from others. Big pharma, we love medical devices. That's probably our favorite subsector. And then we like the smaller biotech. We think there's an opportunity for them to outperform.
So what's your reopening play for the next 12 months, say?
Yeah, from an ETF perspective, there's two ETFs that we're focused on. One is IHI, which is a medical device fund. And the second one we like is XBI, which is biotech, and it's an equal weight biotech. So you get a lot of the small cap exposure.
Right, thank you very much. That was Bryan Koslow, the principal of independent investment firm Clarus Group. Before I go, here are the top stories in this sector. As I just mentioned, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway says it has either trimmed or eliminated stakes in several pharmaceutical companies. The company revealed it sold its entire $180 million stake in Germany's Biogen and cut holdings in AbbVie, Bristol-Myers Squibb and Merck. Bucking the trend, Berkshire revealed it bought $50 million of Merck's spin-off Organon. Berkshire has been a net seller of stocks in 2021, suggesting Buffett and his investment managers remain wary of valuations as stock prices regularly set new highs. The US plans to begin administering COVID-19 booster shots as early as mid or late September, pending authorization from the US Food and Drug Administration. This is according to a source familiar with the discussions. Now, last week, US regulators authorized a third dose of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines for people with compromised immune systems. And health officials in the administration of President Joe Biden appear to be gathering around the view that most people should get a booster shot 8 months after they've completed their initial vaccination. And finally, Germany's Bryan has filed a petition with the US Supreme Court to reverse an appeals court verdict that upheld damages to a customer, blaming his cancer on the company's weed killer, commonly known as Roundup. Bryan last week lost a third appeal against verdicts that sided with users of Roundup, awarding them tens of millions of dollars each. Roundup-related lawsuits have plagued the company since it bought the brand as part of its $63 billion acquisition of Monsanto in 2018. And that's your roundup of the healthcare sector. I'm Angeline Ong, and this is Reuters.